Hey, and welcome to week 4 of Philosophy 307, Philosophy of Law. My name is Jimmy, and I will be your professor this week. Uh, so this week we're going to talk about theories of punishment. It's important to talk about punishment for a variety of reasons, one of which is that it's often a very important tool used by the law and government and societies. And the other is that we're philosophers of law in this class, and so we want to think better about the tools uh, that the law uses from the perspective of a philosopher. Um, and it's important to get theories of punishment correct, even to think about different theories of punishment, because people often assume that punishment is designed to do one thing rather than something else, and it's meant to accomplish something. But it's actually not clear what punishment is designed to do, at least in its entirety. So there's 4 different theories, and we're going to go through each one of them as to what punishment is accomplishing within societies, but these could equally apply to families, institutions, religions, etc. Any group of people where you want to uh, reward and sanction certain types of behavior, punishment is going to be a tool or a set of tools in that mix. So, what exactly is punishment? Well, punishment we're talking about um, anything that discourages behavior with something undesirable. Typically, things like um, caning, hanging, jail, um, anything that is humiliating, painful, or otherwise like detrimental. This is typically distinguished from fines. So punishment often isn't, it's like a speeding ticket, for example, often isn't categorized as a punishment in the philosophy of the law, although broadly speaking, it is in a common sense way. But we're basically talking about things like the death penalty or jail time, things that are non-monetary and meant to correct behavior. So, what are the 4 main theories of punishment? Well, deterrence is one of them. Deterrence is the idea that you punish people to signal to others what not to do. Protection, this is to protect innocents from people who would violate the law. This in particular applies to people who are especially violent or very, very good and inclined at things like property theft or fraud. Retribution. This is the idea that punishment is designed to treat people the way they treat others. So you find this strain, for example, in the thought of Immanuel Kant, the German moral 18th century philosopher. Um, that there's reform. That punishment is meant to reform the person being punished. So those are the big 4 theories. There are a couple others on the margin. We're not going to get into those in a class like this here, though. So deterrence. Deterrence is the idea that punishment should be of a nature that puts people off of committing crimes. So deterrence can both apply to the person being punished. The person going to jail, for example, might think, I don't really want to go to jail again. It was not very pleasant, and this will deter future bad behavior. Personal disclosure, about 20 years ago, I was arrested for shoplifting. I am, as at the time of recording this, 41 years old, but I was arrested at 18 for shoplifting. And I can say for me personally, having spent a few days in jail, it did definitely deter me. That was not pleasant. Um, so the second one is reform. This is the idea that punishment should change criminals. This is what you hear about when you hear about like talk of rehabilitation. People often criticize the American penal system for its lack of ability, presumably, to rehabilitate, with a few exceptions. And one of the ways of measuring this is just to see how often people re-offend. How often do they go back to jail? Uh, there is a show on MSNBC, or was on MSNBC a number of years ago, called Lockup, that does this. It's from like the 2010s. Um, and you get to track people and sort of see how likely they're to return to jail and so forth. Or to be punished again. And obviously, reform only works if the person survives. So reform as a theory of punishment wouldn't really apply, for example, to capital punishment. It's hard to see how someone who has been killed can reform, at least in this life anyway, bracketing off the possibility of an afterlife. Um, then there's the third theory is retribution. Um, this is the idea that you make criminals pay for what they've done, and It is often in popular media, retribution is conflated with revenge, which is stupid. Revenge is the idea that you are punishing someone purely for the pleasure you derive in their suffering. It's got a sadomasochist quality to it. Retribution is the idea that you should be treated in a way that you treat others because it's more dignified that way. So if you're going to go around as a rational adult human being, break the law in such a way as to inflict pain and suffering needlessly on people who do not deserve it, then the state will do the same to you. Since you've decided it's acceptable to do that to other people, I'll have you be done deal. And then so this is there's a very famous philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who holds the retributionist view of punishment. He thinks to not punish people in certain ways, especially in ways that they've acted, is to treat them like children, not adults. It's undignified. And lastly, the fourth theory is protection. It's not so much about punishing the person who's done something wrong as it is about cordoning them off and bracketing them off from society so that innocent people, in particular your most vulnerable, marginal members of society, the poor, disabled, people who are older, weaker, etc., are protected from criminals who would otherwise take advantage of them. So these are the four mainstream theories of punishment, and you'll notice that deterrence, reform, retribution, and protection are not, in fact, mutually exclusive. You could think that punishment is supposed to do all four. It's maybe supposed to do three of the four, two of the four, or one of the four, or none. Maybe you think punishment does none of these things. Maybe it doesn't deter, reform, retribute justice, or protect. So, but these are the main. So theories of punishment, in other words, are supposed to justify why it is or how it is that we are allowed to punish other people. Um, Usually, the means by which we punish people, whether it is inflicting pain and suffering, confining them to spaces, etc., are the sorts of things we're often punished for. So the question then is why? What is the government trying to accomplish by punishing people, and what justifies the punishment? Theories of punishment do both of those things. So they're trying to explain what punishment accomplishes and what justifies punishing people in the first place. So let's start with the most obvious, which is deterrence. This is supposed to put people off of committing crimes. So not just the person being punished. So it can include that the criminal who commits the crime is punished and thereby deterred from doing it again. So it can be a direct deterrence where you deter the criminal. Punishment of this sort on the deterrence theory also signals to others that breaking the law is unacceptable to society and will result in a costly punishment to them. So when people use phrases like the judge made an example of the suspect, this is what they're talking about. That they mean is that not only will it, at least in some cases, deter the person from doing this in the future, sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not, but if nothing else, it'll send a signal to other potential criminals that society does not tolerate this kind of law breaking and harm to others, and that anyone who does it will be punished, just like the person in the example. So, so it's doing more than just convincing the individual, not to, the individual, the suspect in question, not to commit further crimes. Uh, this is often a misunderstanding of deterrence. It's doing more than that. It's an attempt to deter the person from committing future crimes, the person in question, the criminal in question, but also other people from committing crimes in the first place. So why does it work? Well, it works typically if punishments are so severe that people don't want to experience them. This has to work if the punishment is worse than what the person would otherwise experience. So if you're someone who lives in a very particularly poor, violent neighborhood, this might not be much of a deterrence, especially if jail is about as good or as bad as the place you live in normally. Uh, the idea is that it's supposed to be done in public. This is why we have public trials, what are known as frog walks. This is when you walk people walk people in handcuffs to a paddy wagon or a police car or in some way or other that is very visible and very, very conspicuous. The idea is that you want other people to be aware these people are being punished and why they're being punished, such that they can imagine if they were to commit the same crimes, they would be punished in similar ways that are both very, very public and humiliating and also very, very undesirable. That's why they're publicized so people will stay aware of them and avoid breaking the law. This is oftentimes too why frog walks or public arrests tend to be fairly humiliating. When I was arrested an 18-year-old idiot. I was still in high school and working for a retail store, I won't say which, at the time, and I was arrested in the store and police walked me out very, very visibly. It was humiliating, and it's not something that I was very keen on repeating. So this was 23 years ago, 24 years ago. So it's been a while. It was in 2001. So 24 years ago. Almost. At the time of recording. So in any case, but the humiliation, the public component of it, and the punishment itself are all meant to both deter the criminal from committing future crimes and deterring others from committing crimes like those. There's protection, and the kind of punishment that may or may not deter, it may or may not rehabilitate, it may or may not um, even form the basis of retribution. But if nothing else, putting violent people or people who are intent on fraud or other forms of very bad lawbreaking behind bars is a way of protecting others. So the kind of punishment doesn't really, if you think punishment is trying to accomplish and is justified by protecting others, then it's really not about the prisoner. This is a point about protection, and the role of punishment being protection is a point that is often made by determinists. Determinists are philosophers who think that you and I, in virtue of our physicality, I'm made of meat, so are you, right? Our brains are made of meat. We're physical objects that obey physical laws and so can't have free will. Determinists are often asked then, well, if people don't have free will and they're not responsible for their actions, then why are they being punished? Well, this is where the protection theory comes into the picture. This is the kind of punishment that doesn't try to stop lawbreakers before they break the law. It's not even really necessarily about holding the lawbreakers responsible. Perhaps the people behind bars were always meant to commit laws because of the way their brains were formed and the laws of physics. Maybe they had no choice in the matter. Maybe they have no free will. But on the theory of protection, it doesn't read that's those points are neither here nor there. They don't really matter. The point of the punishment is to protect innocence. It's even if you, for example, think that an injured tiger doesn't necessarily deserve to be in a zoo and confined, um, it might be that you're confining the tiger for reasons of rehabilitation, meaning the tiger is injured and needs a place to heal, and the wild is not a place for that at all. And while it's healing, you also need to protect people, the people in society, in a sense, who, if you were to allow a tiger to just run free, would do some serious damage to those people. Um, the point here is not to compare people with tigers. It's just to say that we often don't think of tigers as having the same level of free will as we think of human. But if determinists are right, then even humans don't have free will. So you would, of course, have questions as to why people go to jail over others if some people are just determined to commit crimes and others are determined not to. It doesn't seem like a matter of personal responsibility at that point, and therefore not blameworthy. To which determinists will come up with the protection. Well, we allow the protection theory of punishment and simply point out, hey, look, this isn't really about punishing the prisoner, and it's not about saying that they're blameworthy necessarily. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But it is about protecting innocents in a society from their law breaking. And that has an urgency to it insofar as the law breaking is particularly violent, dangerous, or detrimental. So, why does it work? Well, it removes the society from, or the offender from society, right, by blocking them up. It makes the public feel safer and often makes them safer. So, one of the ways you get rid of violent crime or bring down violent crime is you lock people up. There are definitely downsides to this, obviously. This is not a class on prisons or the sociology of prisons, so we're not going to get into that at all. But it's simply to highlight some of the benefits of punishment. Um, People are aware the offender is no longer around, and it prevents them from committing future crimes. The prisoner who would have, or the offender who would have, had they not been in jail, robbed someone at gunpoint, committed rape, stolen a car, burned down the place for insurance fraud. Um, these things won't happen because the person's in jail. So that's how it works. Um, there's retribution. So This isn't really about stopping offenders before they break the law. It's not really about protecting society or innocence or the offender themselves. And it's not really about restitution or restoration, making the person better, making them better um, on the other side of the punishment, so they're less likely to offend. Retribution is about punishing people um, and making sure the people are punished properly. So it's about proper punishment. One way to approach this is victims' dignity. So someone who, for example, breaks into a home in the middle of the night, steals the stuff of a family, violently beats some of the people with a pistol, maybe engages in rape and other kinds of violent behavior. This is someone who, on this theory of punishment, deserves to be punished harshly. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Typically, people who are retributivists, these are people who hold the theory of retribution as a theory of punishment, believe that human beings are free, we do have free will, and we are responsible for our choices. So when someone chooses, whether they have perverse incentives or not, whether they're desperate or not, there's still a choice involved. And if they choose to break in someone's house and do horrific things to somebody, then they've made a choice for which they deserve to experience consequences. They have taken actions or taken made choices that will bring consequences upon themselves, and they deserve it. And to not punish them is to treat them as if they're not responsible for their actions. They are not grown adults, but rather to treat them more like children. So sometimes what we'll do is shield children from the repercussions of their actions because of the lack of blameworthiness or the child doesn't understand. Uh, Retribution holds that sort of similar that you punish people because they chose to do the things that they did and for the victim's sake. And because to not do so is undignified, it's to signal that the person who committed the crime is not really an adult and is really to treat them as if they don't bear responsibility for their actions. So one can see how, in many ways, the theory of protection, the punishment theory of protection, excuse me, the protection theory of punishment and the retribution theory of punishment are somewhat in tension with each other. They don't have to be, but they often are. Um, so what, why does the theory of retribution work? Like, how does it work? What benefits are there? Um, so the punishments often give something to the victim. The victim meaning money, restitution, etc. So if you steal, and then you're made to return the money. The punishment can restore the dignity of the victim if the victim feels as if the government or the state or the powers that be are punishing these people in accordance with the severity of their crime. It signals to the victim that the state takes this very seriously and that violations of these laws and that doing something illegal are wrong and should be punished accordingly. It's a kind of way of making them an example for the community that this signals what society values and what it cares about and what matters by what it punishes and what it rewards. And there's a public component to it too, which is that if you have committed horrible crimes, you don't deserve things like privacy and uh, dignity. That not punishing you sufficiently would be undignified, would signal that your crime doesn't matter, would be to treat you like a child, and would be to signal to the victim that their victimization doesn't matter. So those are the appeals of the theory. But like with the other the theories of punishment we've gone through, you can imagine any number of people that don't accept it or reject it. And then finally, there's reform. So this is the one that this is probably one of the more popular. Reform and deterrence are probably the two most popular. Um, Reform is the idea that punishment should change people, change the offenders, such that they're better in the future. So this is meant, reform is often seen as a win for the offender. And the reason for this is that it allows them a better life going forward. And it's also seen often as a benefit for society, meaning that society doesn't have to bear the costs of law breaking, punishment, etc. anymore. And can also signal to people that going to jail is just reformatory. It reforms. So what are the benefits of, or what are the upsides of the reform theory of punishment? Well, the punishment is supposed to educate offenders and would-be offenders that breaking the law is not good. It can help train them for jobs or future vocations, future social roles, whether it's specifically getting a job or not. Presumably the offender is going to be less resentful of being punished if in exchange they're given an opportunity at a second chance, making themselves better and reducing their probability or likelihood they're going to end up in jail. But you have to assume rehabilitation of the offender is possible. Um, it's whether it is or isn't, it's too short of a class to get into, and I think probably it is. Um, but in order for the theory to work, you have to assume rehabilitation is possible, and then you also have to assume it needs to be done in certain ways. In closing, it is worth pointing out that whatever theory of punishment you end up favoring, it is nevertheless the case that oftentimes the goals of the different theories of punishment can come in conflict. So, um, whether rehabilitation works, so punishment can do all of these things, but different aspects, um, like the offender might not feel resentful of being punished, for example. That might be a benefit of rehabilitation and the reform theory of punishment, but it seems to clash at least somewhat with the retributivist theory of punishment. But whether or not there are conflicts or not is not a topic of this class. It's a little too long, but it's definitely worth thinking about in your discussion posts and the midterm, the final. So something to keep in mind as the course progresses.